Now I would request the panelists, Dr. Swami and Dr. Malhotra ji and Poonam ji and Shaina ji to start discussion. Then we can have perhaps questions from the audience. Sir, Dr. Swami, would you like to engage with Mr. Malhotra and we can start?
I know him too well.
No, we don't know him too well, so it'd be good to.
I've said what I have to say. There's no question. There are mics which are going to be passed in the audience. So could you just raise your hands? There are volunteers here who will be passing you the mic.
Dr. Swami, I'm Advocate Shreyas Rao. I'm a practicing lawyer in Bombay High Court with expertise in criminal and constitutional law. First of all, I'm extremely delighted by your august presence. I'd like to give you credit for valiantly fighting emergency. Secondly, opposing LTT tooth and nail, putting your life at risk. Thirdly, I give you credit 2 days back for procuring the correspondence between Chidambaram and Raja. Ever since you have caught Chidambaram with its pants down, he's been silent, and there is a saying, being silent in the face of wrong is no different from being a conspirator, and truth should be loudly confronted from rooftops.
Shreyas, please ask the questions because a lot of people here. Please ask.
Dr. Swami,
please ask your questions.
India has a hostile neighborhood. India has a hostile neighborhood. You have been a strong proponent of Indo-US and Israel strategic ties in terms of economy and military. You're an authority on Chinese economy. You're conversant with Mandarin language. But it is known that China has a covert alliance with Pakistan. But in India's supreme economic interest, we need to have economic relations with China. But as far as security is concerned, we need to be wary and circumspect with China because China has been having has unabated territorial hegemony in conquering Arunachal Pradesh and several territorial parts of India. So what is your take on that?
Be brief.
The request for
Please,
everyone.
that was my question.
A request for everyone. Please avoid making speeches. Make your very specific question, please. Thanks.
Well, I think the long and short of it is that you want to know what you should do about China, right? Well, you see, there is no such thing as a country you can trust. The United States, with whom we want to be friends, in 1971, they sent the 7th Fleet Task Force into the Bay of Bengal. And you know that there were nuclear weapons on board. So the question of United States is not that it's going to be friendly, it's a question of the United States' interests. No country should ever deal with another country in the terms of sentiment. If China has capacity to harm you, you should acquire capacity to harm them. Doesn't mean you have to use the capacity, but you have the capacity. China has certain weaknesses, we should recognize that. It has a very long supply line to the borders of India. Therefore, you should be developing the Air Force and the missile strike that in the event of a war, you knock off those supply lines. China has a neighbor like Pakistan, which is totally loyal to China. We should respond by developing a naval base in Car Nicobar in alliance with Indonesia. because 90% of the Chinese foreign trade passes through ships through the Malacca Strait. If you are able to control the Malacca Strait, you can suffocate China anytime you want. So I think to some extent Mr. Manmohan Singh is trying that when he moved to South China Sea. And you see how the Chinese are reacting. So that's the way to deal with it. The foolishness was of Jawaharlal Nehru was to abandon your defense preparations because you thought the Chinese are your brothers. And when the Chinese turned around, you were defenseless. So this is the way, even with the United States, we have to look at the United States' interests. We cannot become another Australia or Japan. We have to be an equal partner with the United States, so we may have disagreements with them, we may have agreements with them. But there are some common objectives, such as in terrorism. That's why I say Israel, India and China should, Israel, India and the United States should bond together as strategic allies as far as terrorism concerns, which is the number one point. So, should we try to befriend China? Yes. But not with our eyes closed. Not by wearing our heart on the sleeve, but with full preparation that the event of a war, we should be able to give China a reply. But if it's possible to have give and take to China, then we must engage in that without sacrificing our basic national interests. I have been to China many times. They regard me as a friend, but I have told them that you reject the McMahon line because you say it's an imperialist line. But you have accepted it with Burma. Burma, they have signed an agreement where they specifically said that the McMahon line will be the border between Burma and China. So how can you raise this argument with us? I was also able to persuade them to open the route to Kailash Mansarovar, which many governments tried and failed. I think that what we should work towards is globally is a trilateral combination: United States, China, and India. We are the three most populous countries. We have the three largest GDPs, and I think with the three of us, through the process of give and take, without sacrificing the fundamentals, should try to get together.
Okay, there is a question that has come in on SMS for Dr. Swami. In what way do you think Hindutva will benefit the process of globalization with one Indian attributes? Do you think we'll be able to sustain our relations with the rest of the world by aggressively propagating a single faith?
Hindutva is not a faith; it's Hindu-ness. It's a quality. It's not a religion. And that's why, if you really see the kinds of concepts I'm talking about, Mahatma Gandhi propagated it. Many Muslim intellectuals got annoyed with me when I said that you must acknowledge that your ancestors are Hindus. Well, Jawaharlal Nehru, when he gave his convocation address to the Aligarh Muslim University in 1948, what did he say? He said, I am a Hindu, you are a Muslim, but both our ancestors are the same. We derive our sustenance from the great Hindu tradition of India. I'm happy to see that the Sufis who constitute a very large proportion of Muslim population, they held a rally recently and they said, India is our country because we are 98% from Hindus. So, therefore, when I am talking about Hindutva, I am talking about Hindu values. Values where in the question of bonding between father and son, mother and daughter, husband and wife, kinds of things that we have, these are called cultural things. And Muslims and Christians and Hindus, they share that culture. What is the international? Internationally, they are all taking to Hindutva. The richest Hollywood actress, Julia Roberts, not only took to Hindutva, she also converted to Hinduism. The man who gave you iPad, Stephen Jobs, was a vagabond till he came to Varanasi to Neem Karoli Baba's ashram, and he adopted the Hindu practices. And even in his general bodies, he would do Namaste, you should sit cross-legged. And the kinds of things he preached was Hindu concepts. What is the Hindu concept? The Hindu concept is that you only have freedom of action, but the reward of your action will come to you, but in what form, where, you can't say. You may do very good work and get a very good job, but a very bad wife. Or you may get a very bad job and a very good wife. That kind of balancing will take place. And I'm not a gender oriented comment, I'll say the same thing for women also. So, I think we must understand, that's why the Supreme Court said in 1996, Hindutva is not against the Constitution of India. And that's how Manoj Joshi escaped, yes. So, we need not be defensive. This Hindutva is being accepted all over the world today. Even on globalization, there's a book, I forget the name of the author, just come out, I saw it, you can Google it. Ancient Hindu Values for Globalization. So, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, Aham Nija Paraveti, Gadana Lagu Chetasam, Udara Charitanam Achu, Cha, Vasudeva Kutumbakam. That means, don't think of this as mine and this as yours and all these petty things, Lagu Chetasam, let's say. Think of the whole world as belonging to you. That means the perspective that we have, and I am not at all defensive about Hindutva. I don't think any Muslim and Christian should be defensive about Hindutva.
Take a question from the audience. Who's got the mic?
Good morning, sir. It's an honor to be in your presence. So, you started off by saying, so India through the ages was plundered and people coming in. So, you look at today's India. So, you have one part which opens up for markets, you have factories setting up shop here, everyone wanted to come to India, and the second one ma'am spoke about, the agricultural side. So, do you see a potential imbalance between these two Indias? Would you acknowledge it, and how do you see it shaping up in the near future?
No, I don't see any. We can modernize our agriculture, for which we need an industrial base. But I think we don't have to produce everything like the Soviet model wanted us to do. We should go by the normal laws of economics. There are many things we can do which, for instance, if you want to knock out China, I'll give you one easy formula. The entire Chinese economic growth has been propelled by exports to Europe and the United States. And how do these exports, how are they created? I mean, these goods for exports, semi-processed goods from East Asia go to China, and there they value added. Take this Lenovo. Lenovo is not a Chinese laptop. It's actually a Taiwan laptop. But the Chinese add value to it. And then they export it. So China has a deficit of trade with East Asia and a surplus of trade with Europe and the United States. Ask these East Asian countries, you divert that from India. We have a cheaper labor force. We have got a court system. Our intellectual property rights are better. All that, but the East Asian countries will say, you've got terrible infrastructure. That is why we can't come. There's hassle everywhere. There's octroi. Then they are, maybe in the center you've got economic reform, but in the states you're still living in the past. And if you want to buy land, you have a problem. If you want an electricity connection, you have a problem. So once you get out of that, you can finish China in no time. You can get that traffic diverted. China will be nowhere. The economy will be in a state of collapse. So therefore, I think we need to balance that, but we have a huge advantage which even the Chinese don't have. You know, the Indian agricultural research experimental plots produce 7 times the output per acre that the average farmer in India produces. Imagine what impact it will have. If you grow 3 crops a year, you will get triple the production. And we grow only in 25% of our land, we grow more than 1 crop. So the potential is enormous, so you integrate your industrial development with this thing and borrow technology liberally. I think that's the formula for economic renaissance.
Question there. Yes, please go ahead.
That lady there.
Lady, yeah, you had the mic previously.
Yeah. Good to know.
Good morning, sir. I'm Swati Sharma and I'm working with the IT multinational company as a consultant. My question to you, you talked about that, a question that you asked to Harvard students, that people in India don't want to take risks. I want to ask a question that the society and the structure, education structure that is there in India, it simply does not support taking risks. Because there the education is entirely free, right? And our society do not appreciate failures at all. If you take a risk and if you're successful, then it's okay. But if you're a failure, you're completely doomed. So what is the option that we have? I mean, even if we want to take risks, we want to do something different. What do we do?
Fight it. Take risk and see the rewards and set an example for others. There's no use complaining. These are all inherited years and years of foreign rule that we have come to this state where people are more keen on protecting what they have than risk losing whatever little they have. That's a mental state. It doesn't work. Any country in the world which has prospered is because the people took risk. So you take risk, try to explain to your parents, but they don't listen. Do what you have to do. So I don't think that this is a Indian concept. Indians have always been of questioning mind. They've always done what they wanted to do. People have tried to. There's no concept of blasphemy in Hinduism, and that's because you gave the mind complete freedom to explore what you wanted to do. But I would say in brief that if you want to take risk, first learn about the 6 different intelligences that you must acquire. The cognitive, the emotional, the social, moral, spiritual, and ecological intelligences. If you imbibe that, you will not have problem taking risk and in the long run, prosperity. You can't expect every time you take risk to succeed, but once you fail, get up and start again.
Next question is on SMS from Jairam, and this is Poonam could perhaps answer this. How do you ensure a free media in India?
I'm a media victim. My family is, so I don't know how to fight about it. But is it the question to Dr. Swami?
No, to you. You answer.
You're the right person, I guess. Yeah. Actually, media, what I have seen before and after my father, has been an amusing issue for me. Maybe somewhere we go round. Media trial I have seen media trial, how it goes, how to fight it, but you can't fight it, sir. Somehow there should be some kind of a control to be working on. Media has helped with 2G spectrum, but it has not helped me with my own issues. Yes, media is, still I feel it's not like in England, where media is coming out as paparazzi and living inside your life or inside your houses. But yes, it's a very important, grave situation. As being a politician, I do not want to talk so strongly against it. But I am a victim of media. There is some kind of ethics for a politician, what you expect to do, media also have to put it across. So that kind of question I do ask media, but I do not get answers because they are better politicians than us, I feel.
Add to that one point.
Just add to that one point, a lot of the media you're seeing is totally paid media, and unfortunately a party like the BJP does not endorse that culture at all.
I want to ask a question on that. Would you as a party go strongly against campaign against this paid news? Because we have seen one example.
Absolutely, we've been doing that throughout, but we are the biggest sufferers.
Disqualification on paid news. So will you take it up and fight on that?
We have not supported paid news at all, and we are the biggest sufferers in that sense. We all know about the Congress's allegiance to a lot of channels, their hold on a lot of electronic media, print media, etc. But having said that, I think that one needs to realize that you have to have the support of the media also. So even if it's a perception versus reality case, where the reality is reported, that's good enough.
And then my
The next question, I'll take it from SMS which has come. This is for Dr. Swami. There are two questions actually. It is being said that you were the one to introduce Dr. Manmohan Singh during 1991 as a finance minister. So what has changed from 91?
Is this an accusation or a compliment?
So what has changed from 1991 to 2011? Do you think it was your mistake to introduce him? And the second question, by when will TC, I assume that's Chidambaram, be arrested and what implications will it have?
Well, as far as Manmohan Singh is concerned, I've known him for a very, very long time. He maybe 42 years. We were professors together at one stage. He was, of course, senior to me, he's older to me too. But in 1990, I became a minister. And very first day, I began the process of trying to see whether a blueprint for economic reform can be made ready. I was benefited by the fact that India was in an economic crisis, terrible economic crisis. So, plus the Soviet Union had begun to crumble, so the influence of the Soviet Union was very low. And third is Mr. Chandrasekhar became Prime Minister because I played a role with Rajiv Gandhi to make him. So I had a lot of free hand to do many things because of the Prime Minister relationship I had. So when our round came, the first thing I did is look around for Manmohan Singh because he had been in the civil service, he knew economics well, he was a scholar, he was an honest man. And I found that he had migrated to Switzerland. He was living in Geneva as part of something called South-South Commission. We got him to the Prime Minister's office, phoned him and brought him back. And he became economic advisor to the government of India, which meant largely dealing with me. And of course he wanted Montek Singh to be made my Commerce Secretary, so I made him my Commerce Secretary. So the three of us interacted and prepared a blueprint. And we got it through the cabinet, but the moment it passed through cabinet, there was a quarrel between Rajiv Gandhi and Chandrasekhar. The government fell, and elections came. Narasimha Rao came. Narasimha Rao were also great friends. He invited me to join the government on one condition, that I'll join Congress party. But I said I'll never do that. Maybe I had a premonition that Rakshasi is going to come, so my future will be, in the long run bleak if I joined it. So I didn't join. And then he made me chairman of the CAT Commission with cabinet rank. So I was part of that government too in that sense. So let me say the blueprint was prepared by me. The guts to implement it was of Narasimha Rao and ably assisted in carrying it out administratively was of Manmohan Singh. In that role, Manmohan Singh is very good. But now as Prime Minister, he's still a very good man, still got good ideas, but they don't let him function. The reason I'm still supporting him is that if he goes, we'll get a moron as a Prime Minister. Even if he's a young chap, but still he's a moron. And therefore, if the whole UPA can be kicked out, that's fine. With that, Manmohan Singh can go. Manmohan Singh is in the same position as Bhishmacharya was in Mahabharata when he watched Draupadi being stripped. And he said, "Main vivashu, I am under constraint." And in the end, that is what Krishna told Arjuna. When Arjuna was hesitating, he told him that when a man hesitates, when a great moral question arises, then that person doesn't deserve to live in the war situation. And let elections come, we will target Manmohan Singh, but till that time, please don't disturb him because what you'll get will be much worse than what he is. The second question. I find near unanimity in Delhi that he should go to jail as quickly as possible. But I have only one complaint I have received against it, and that is from the jail superintendent of TRJ, who told my friend that please tell Swami, first he sends Raja, then Kanimori, then I hear that Maran is coming, then after that Chidambaram. My Bawarchi is getting very agitated. They are all asking for masala dosa and idli. And he doesn't know how to make it. So I said, tell him to be thankful. Soon some Italian will come and he'll have to make pizza. There are 3 offences. Offence number 1, that this license, the spectrum license was given at 2001 prices. That was a joint decision between Raja and Chidambaram because 2003, when your dad was telecom minister, it was decided that this subject will be, this will be decided by 2 ministers, not by the cabinet. Finance minister and telecom minister. So the entire blame was put on Raja for fixing this price. But I found out from documents, which had been hidden by Mr. Chidambaram, but I know how to get documents out. I found that there were 4 meetings where Mr. Chidambaram very clearly comes out as the senior partner, telling Mr. Raja what he should do. So on that price fixing, he is as guilty as Raja. Number 2, then they permitted 2 companies which are purely real estate companies, didn't have a single tower or any telecom equipment, Swan and Unitech, to sell out after getting the license, to sell this license de facto at 8 times the price they paid the government of India. I mean, he paid a huge amount of money. There was a legal problem of lock-in period. And Mr. Chidambaram explained to Raja that don't allow them to sell the company, but let them issue enough new equity that they will get control of the company. And so by a roundabout route, it amounted to the same thing, and therefore Swan's license became Etisalat's, and Unitech's license became Telenor's. Third is that when Shivraj Patil was Home Minister, he had sent a big report to Chidambaram as Finance Minister that Etisalat and Telenor should not be allowed any business in India. Why? Because Etisalat is a front for Pakistan and ISI, and its man in India, who is in Bombay, was in Bombay now, of course he is a resident of Tihar, but he was in Bombay, Shahid Balwaz, is a right-hand man of Dawood Ibrahim. This is one objection. Second objection, that Telenor buys equipment from Chinese People's Army, and that can also be used for cyber warfare. In a war between India and China, they can put virus into our defense electronics and laptops. So they were blacklisted. But Mr. Chidambaram ignored it and told Raja, you can go ahead. So on the first, I have got independent documentation. On the third, I've got independent documentation. But the second one about selling, I didn't have. Finally, I went to the court and I found out that one file, it should have been in the court's hands, was actually being kept by the CBI. So for the first time in independent history, a private citizen was empowered by the court to receive a secret file from the CBI. And now, all three offences, I have proved it. And 3rd of December, I have to move a motion, move a complaint to make Chidambaram a co-accused, and after that, TR is not far away.